Welcome to the Convergent Impact Leadership Podcast. I'm Eric Savickas, a leadership coach, retired Army officer, and someone who cares deeply about building people-centered leadership in the fire service. This podcast is a place for honest conversations, practical insights, and leadership ideas that help teams grow stronger inside the firehouse and beyond. Whether you're leading a crew or shaping a department, I'm glad you're here. And today, I'm especially excited to be joined by Chief Alec Oughton, Fire Chief of Aurora Fire Rescue in Colorado. Chief Oughton was selected as Aurora's Fire Chief in 2023 after serving more than 2 decades with the Henrico County Division of Fire in Virginia, where he rose through every rank in the department, including serving as Deputy Chief of Operations before being appointed Fire Chief in 2019. Across nearly 3 decades in the fire service, Chief Oughton has served in a variety of operational and leadership roles, including firefighter, paramedic, and field medical technician with the U.S. Naval Reserve. He currently serves on the Metro Denver Fire Chiefs Association, represents the fire service through the Colorado Municipal League and Colorado Fire Commission, and contributes nationally through his work with the Center for Public Safety Excellence, where he serves as both a board member and peer assessor. Chief Oughton holds a master's degree in public administration and is a graduate of the National Fire Academy's Executive Fire Officer Program. Throughout his career, he's led within large accredited organizations while helping navigate the realities that come with organizational growth, operational complexity, cultural alignment, and leadership accountability. In today's conversation, we're going to spend less time talking about leadership theory and more time exploring the realities of leading a large, complex fire department, particularly the challenge of maintaining alignment, communication, culture, and clarity across the organization. We'll talk about what happens as messages move through layers of leadership, how chiefs balance consistency with empowerment, and how leaders know whether their intent is actually being understood throughout the department. Oughton, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for being here.
Eric, I'm really grateful to be here, and I fully recognize that you're scraping the bottom of the barrel since you had to come ask me to be part of this, but I am hoping that I can contribute, and I think if we can crack the code on organizational alignment and consistency and effective communication, we're going to both be bazillionaires, and that's an actual number, so I've heard. So thank you for having me. I'm really grateful.
Be a bazillionaire.
I'm with you.
So as I do with most guests that I have on, I would love to start by hearing about your journey. We went over your bio there in the introduction, but I'm sure that doesn't tell the whole story of what got you interested in the fire service and then how you came to be here in Colorado leading one of the biggest fire departments here in the state.
Yeah, it's a long and kind of twisted story. I mean, we all get on these roadmaps, and some of them are straight lines and some of them are curvy with a lot of exit ramps. And mine was the latter. I originally went to, right out of high school, like a lot of my friends, went to college. I went to Virginia Tech in Blacksburg, Virginia, and was accepted into their engineering program. And there I studied aerospace and ocean engineering. And I did that for 2 years before I recognized that I was not good at that. Something about 5-hour calculus and, ship hydromechanics and mechanics of deformable bodies, statics and dynamics that literally blew up my mind. And so I quickly recognized that that wasn't going to be the place, at least in that space and time for me to pursue that degree and keep going down that road. It was kind of serendipity. While I was there, I joined a fraternity. A really good friend of mine, one of my fraternity brothers, was the captain on Virginia Tech's Volunteer Rescue Squad, which was one of the largest and busiest all-student-run volunteer EMS agencies in the country. And that was it for me. I mean, once I dipped my toe in that water and realized how cool it was to just go and help people in their time of need, I think it was really over after that. That sparked my interest in medicine. It sparked my interest in pre-hospital care and really was the big catalyst for me to kind of launch into this career.
It sounds like a good starting point, and definitely throughout the decades of your service has sparked that interest. So when you're coming up through the ranks and you started as a firefighter, and then I assume you were a medic based on your background and other things, and then you start taking on leadership roles, company officer, eventually battalion chief, and other bigger roles from that. When do you start to determine that, at what point do you realize that it's a bigger animal in a large organization than just the crew right in front of you, where there's multiple pieces that you have to kind of manage and understand and synchronize?
That's a fantastic question because I think it really varies for different people when they start to acknowledge that they're part of a system, right? Part of a larger organization, and everybody is a contributing part of that. I think that comes at different times for people. I think it's a combination of personal and professional experiences that really kind of led me down that road. And if you'll give me just a minute, I'll share a little bit of a personal experience. In 2006 in Henrico, I was a lieutenant and everything was just kind of plugging along as normal. And my daughter, who was 18 months old at the time, was diagnosed with neuroblastoma, which is a pretty rare form of pediatric cancer. And it really disrupted what I had mapped out for my life and my career, my marriage, and all of the things that are truly the foundation of who we are and what's really important to us. And so it was a pretty substantial shift in my perspective, both personally and professionally. But one of the opportunities that I got in that time frame was to work up in administration, to take some remote work to the transplant floor in Boston and do some policy work for the ops deputy. And I think that was the moment that I became connected to the leadership in the organization and started to really see the bigger picture of how challenging policy development was, why the legal, fiscal, and operational impacts of the policy decisions that we made, and started to come clear, at least come a little more into focus about how big this organization was and how reliant it was on its structure and people and performance and all of those things. So for me, it was sometime in that 2006 window, 2007 window, where I started to see where I fit into the bigger picture of a metropolitan fire department. It was also the space where my leadership perspective really shifted. And I had this mindset prior to that, that have you seen Severance? You know what
Mhm.
I'm talking about? That you should leave your home life at home and
Yeah.
bring your professional self to work. And it was a very naive understanding of human behavior and psychology. It was not very people centered, it was not a human centered leadership approach. But in that moment and in that experience, I fully recognized that I was not able to leave my personal life at home. And it was impacting my work. And the way the leadership in that department at the time cared for me as a whole person, both a professional and as a human, really also started to shape the leadership philosophy that I now use every single day when I care for the members of an organization and when I care for the organization as a whole. I hope that's helpful. I'm
Oh,
sorry
I
to
think
kind of
it's
shift
great.
that, but I think so much of that happened in that time and space that I would be an entirely different leader, I think, had I not experienced that. And also, had I not experienced the type of leadership, Chief Ron Maston at the time was our fire chief and just led with his heart and led putting the humans first, right? He recognized that you were human before you were human capital and created an incredible sense of loyalty to him as a leader and to that organization because of the way he led me through that really critical period of my life.
And I think that's such a great message and a great kind of takeaway there, that people want to work for humans. They want to work for people that have emotions, have feelings, that have the whole wide range of experiences and things going on with them that they do themselves, right? And so always thought it was a shame, whether it was in my military experience and you and your fire experience, or even when you were a Navy corpsman, like when people would say, "Well, leave that stuff at home, leave your emotions at home, or leave your feelings at home." I think we're doing a disservice to the people that we lead because no one wants to work for a robot that's emotionless. They want to, as long as you're not completely losing it, right? You have to maintain, your confidence and your bearing and all of that stuff. But
Well, and we're
but
not
still, they
making
want
that
to
stuff
work
up.
for.
And you're a leadership theory guy, right? And it's not, the background is there, the science is there, the studies have been done that tell you, people want to follow authentic leaders. They want to follow servant leaders who show up for the members of their organization. They want to work for people who can cast a vision and bring people along in that journey. And it creates engagement in a workforce. It creates or fosters an environment where people engage in organizational citizenship behaviors and are more productive and better customer servants and have better well-being and morale. So you're right. It's 100% right. And I think people who don't show up authentic and in some regards vulnerable, admitting their mistakes or their weaknesses or whatever, it's inauthentic and it's dishonest. And I think largely that comes from people's lack of confidence to be who they are. And, we all have strengths. We have areas of strength. We have areas where there are opportunities for us to improve. I have plenty of those, but I'm not afraid to share those, right? Because that I'm human. Just like everybody who works in this organization who has strengths and weaknesses and things that they're afraid of and things that they're really proud of. And I think we're doing organizations a disservice when we're inauthentic and when in a lot of ways we're dishonest about who we are and what we're capable of.
Yeah, definitely. So fast forward to taking command here in Aurora, and I assume that once you are assigned as the fire chief and become the fire chief, sworn in, you get a briefing at some point from your leadership in the department, and they say something like, and I'm just trying to picture it, something like, "Okay, chief, here are our out the door times, here are our run times, here's our call volume, different call types, all the data they're showing you, the health of the organization and where the organization sits." But I can imagine a guy like you, and I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but I can imagine you saying, "Okay, that's all great, but give me the real deal, the real health of the organization. Tell me about the people. Tell me about, you used the term systems before. Tell me about the things that make Aurora Fire work or not work as well as it could beyond the calls." Did you have an experience like that when you first took over?
Yeah, I wish it was like I picture when you were talking about that. This I was smiling, this formal change of command ceremony where the colonel salutes the new colonel and kind of exits stage left for the last time. Man, I wish that happened. No, the chief that was here before was gone. I don't know, 6, 8 months before I got here, and so he departed, and the organization was kind of moving through acting fire chiefs and things like that. And so I think they were trying to kind of keep it between the ditches was really the charge probably that was given to them. When I showed up, I was like, hey, here. Well, first of all, I couldn't get in the building. So that was kind of funny. Security's like, we open at 9. And I was like, no, I work here. But it was there wasn't really a formal handoff. I know it was interesting dynamic, a whole myriad of things that we could probably talk for 30 minutes on that. But there was changing leadership in the city manager's office, and so we were getting a new acting city manager. And so even in that space, it was kind of limited. It was like, here's the keys to your Tahoe. Here's where you sit. This is your email address. Let us know if you need anything. And I don't think that's a unique experience. I think there's a lot of chiefs that take over departments, especially when the role is vacant, unless there's this incredibly robust succession plan and you have the opportunity to be prepared several months. I know that there are some metro departments around us that have done that. I know South Metro, West Metro, when they changed command, they had a little more of a formal process, but it just wasn't the case here. And so, a couple of the things that I found is that the data collection, assembly and analysis was not what I was accustomed to. I think Henrico County had a very robust data collection and analysis system, and even tools that I could use to gather that information myself. And this wasn't here. I think there were some gaps in knowledge really about how the system was performing. Even when I thought of where I came from had a 10-year capital plan, there was just nothing here. Like if you asked folks where the next fire station was going, it was difficult to tell you that, and everybody had a different answer. So really amazing people that work here. You know that, you've been here, you've met several of the leaders here, but just no vision to kind of coalesce around. And the other thing that had happened here for a long time is kind of built castle walls around the city. And it's a great fire department. I would put the firefighters here and battalion chiefs here against any fire department. Like if there was a don't burn this house down competition, like we'd win nationally. I really have confidence in the group. But when it came to looking at how the rest of the country does business related to data and performance measures and things like that, it just wasn't in place. So no really robust turnover that I was aware of. I think the only thing that I got was like maybe day 2, there was some big, thick administrative investigation file and disciplinary recommendation that got put on my desk. So that did get passed on. But anyway, so it wasn't a big turnover. I spent my first 3 months, and I was very honest about this during a pretty rigorous assessment process to get the job, that my first 100 days was really going to be listening. In fact, I remember an interview question where they said, "What's your 90-day plan or 100-day plan?" And I was like, "My plan is to listen." Because if you have somebody who's coming in here with a 100-day plan that's meaningful to you, that you think fits what this organization needs, you should hire them, because they're either evil geniuses or clairvoyant or whatever, but get them while you can. I need to listen to this organization to determine what the pathway forward is going to be. And that's exactly what I did. And so I had the opportunity to move out here. It was a challenge and an opportunity altogether to move out here about 3 months before my family did. And I eat, breathed, and slept Aurora Fire Rescue. I woke up in the morning and had coffee during shift change at every fire station's lunch, dinner. Would spend time in the 911 center till 1 o'clock in the morning, like with the call takers, trying to learn about this organization. And a lot of the information I got about how the system was performing, what the gaps were in training or operations or response times or integration with other departments in the mutual aid system or with our EMS partners, really came from the kitchen tables and the fire stations. And I value that unfiltered feedback. And I will tell you, it is incredibly difficult to find a group of people that will gift you the trust, gift you followership and authenticity and vulnerability in sharing with this new guy. They don't know me, you know? They don't know who I am or how I'm wired. They only know what they watched during the interview process or may have read in a newspaper or heard from my former union president, who is an amazing human. They didn't know me, and so they didn't have to trust me. They didn't have to give me information that I could use to kind of shape the future for the fire department. So I'm incredibly and will be eternally grateful for that confidence that they gave me, and it was truly a gift. But it was unfiltered,
Mhm.
raw, very, very honest, sometimes brutally honest feedback about the needs of the organization. And I'll tell you, 95% of the changes that we've made here in this organization were a direct result of that authenticity, that vulnerability, that honesty, that trust that came from the line staff. So I hope that answers your question, but
Yeah.
it was, I wish it wasn't this. It was,
So I'm
you know,
curious
the,
though.
the salute and exit saves left. It was all right, here's your keys, go figure out what's going on here. And,
So I'm
and that's
curious
precisely what
though,
I,
after your initial 100 days of listening and learning, and I'm sure that phase never ends, right? You're constantly listening and learning, and you will continue to do so. But once you get your kind of your legs under you and you're like, okay, now I want to impart my vision, my intent, my philosophy on the department. Did you use some of those same mechanisms that you did in your first 100 days, the kitchen table talks and the station visits, to communicate your intent? Or did you rely mainly on the chain of command of the department, or a combination of both? How did you ensure people were hearing what you were trying to communicate?
Eric, that's a great question, and it is ultimately it's a combination of both. When I describe organizational leadership, I describe it in the context of a heart, right? And in the heart, you have these main vessels, right? And you know the left anterior descending, right? That's the widowmaker. They all have that's where your major blood flow goes. So if you think of those as the chain of command, the main communication lines, but when you have a blockage of your LAD, you will die without collateral circulation. And so
Mm,
it's when people go running and they exercise, I hate running, by the way, but when they go running and they exercise, they develop the collateral circulation. It doesn't impact the plaque in their LAD. And when they go running, all it means is that they're building that circulation, that communication that will go around, communication of oxygen that will go around that clot when they have that event. And so the chain of command will have filters and blocks in a variety of different places. And so the concept of that collateral communication, that collateral circulation applies in the organism that is the fire department. And so I engage actively in management by walking around. My boss engages in management by walking around. He'll be wandering around in a meeting, like fist bumping people in my office, hey, how's your chief doing? He's trusting but verifying that the information that he's sending down is getting where it needs to go. And the information that I'm sharing with him up is accurate and unfiltered. And that's exactly what I applied. So we use formal communication chains to share the vision and to change messaging and those kinds of things. But we also used other mechanisms, right? So we used the chain. We use direct communication in the form of audio or video messaging. We use a monthly size up report. Over time, we've evolved this Monday memo concept where we consolidate administrative communications down so that it's easily digestible and accessible for the line. And then we get out and we go, badge into the fire stations and go visit them and pop in and drink the best coffee in Colorado and hang out with some amazing humans and hear unfiltered, right? Dispel rumors or confirm them if they're true, and make sure that we close that communication loop and we get the right information out to the line and we get the right information up to make decisions. And I'll tell you, I've shared this with my executive staff, and so they know this is like not a mystery to them, but fire chiefs get handled, right?
yeah.
We have handlers. They're called deputy chiefs, right? And the deputy chiefs will provide us the information that they need us to have in order to make the decisions that they want us to make, right? And so, and it's not malicious; it's efficient, right? I can't hear everything that's going on, and so when they have things going on, they're like, "Hey, I just give you this. I think we should go down this road, right?" And they give you the pieces that kind of confirm that that's the direction that they should go because that's the most efficient way to communicate with your supervisor. And that's awesome 95% of the time. Every now and then there's some piece of really critical information that might get missed in there. And sometimes I'm able to close the gap on that information by asking more questions or kind of going out and doing a little bit of research on my own to make sure that we're headed in the right direction. Sometimes you can close that gap, sometimes you can't. But that collateral circulation is how an organization survives on a day-to-day basis, and then particularly when there's a clot that blocks the formal lines of communication.
But I'm guessing that that collateral system also could end up being a double-edged sword, right? You being the chief have the power to listen and solve things almost immediately, right? You're down in a station, somebody says, "Hey, chief, I'm banging my head against the wall with this thing. I've been trying to, whatever it is, get it solved." And you're like, "Done. I got this," right? Or, I mean, you may not say that, but in your mind, you could solve it very easily. So, with that collateral system of communication there, do you ever find that you really have to stay cognizant of the balance point where you're not undercutting all the other leaders between you and that person that's got the problem or that person that isn't quite getting the message that you're wanting to communicate that you could clear up instantly, but you got to let the system work sometimes.
And that is if you talk to I think all of us have a bias for action. Particularly early on, that was really, I think, pretty challenging for the executive staff. When I would go out and do my station visits and stuff like that, they, probably had their own meetings and were like, all right, stand by, here we go. The idea for is flittering back into the fourth floor. But I think it was required in that space and time where we had a culture, not just within the department, but kind of citywide, this reflexive no, because we're all very busy, right? We've got a lot going on. And so there was this propensity to just squash what were really, really good ideas. And that it was a very top down management style, right? Very autocratic, very authoritarian. It was not collaborative, it was not distributive leadership. And so early in the stages, it was really, really necessary. I would offer that it's way less frequent now that I'm even having to get in the middle of that, because what we've really strived to develop here is a culture of first acknowledging, hey, thank you for bringing that to me, right? When a line staff brings you an idea, knocks on my door and says, hey, we need X, Y, or Z, I've been thinking about this for a long time. A leader should be grateful for that. One, that they're willing to step out on a limb and make themselves vulnerable and share that idea. But two, that we've got amazing people that work for the organization. So over time, we shifted away from the established culture, the existing culture within the leadership team that had the reflexive no, and moved more towards let's figure out a way to get to yes, right? If it's possible, we're going to figure out how to implement your idea. It took a couple years maybe to really start to institutionalize that philosophy. And I think it was probably stressful for them. And it was a challenge for me with that bias for action, to not intervene too frequently. And I don't know that I got it perfect, Eric. Depends who you ask. You should have some of my staff on here next to debunk all all the BS that I spewed out today. But I think it's critically important to trust but verify, and to keep those lines of communication open. And even if it's just an ask of my assistant chief or my deputy chief, like, hey, have you ever heard this idea kind of spinning up out online? And if the answer is no, then, I'll share it with them. If the answer is yes, I'll say, what do you think? Right. And start to gather that information, not fix the problem for him, but at least help him understand that I'm aware that this idea is floating around, that I believe it's interesting. And the request I would make is, hey, let's dig into this and see if there's an opportunity here to really take advantage of this idea. So
Have there been times where or moments where you've been surprised or frustrated, maybe, that your priorities that you thought were completely clear, whether articulated, through one of those sympathetic systems like the size up or your station visits or other things, where you thought you were totally clear on what the priority was, but you got down there and you saw that somebody was doing something completely off and different. Has that caught you off guard at all?
I don't know that it's caught me off guard, because the hardest thing to do in leadership, I think, is to lead through other people,
Mm,
because nobody's ever going to speak with your voice, Eric, right? With the things that you're passionate about. Even take this podcast, for example. Like, if you're not hearing my voice, if I'm like, hey, Hunter or Mark is going to do this podcast for me, they know how I think, right? It's going to be a very different experience. They're not going to necessarily have passion in the same way I do about certain pieces and parts of leadership philosophy and the humans that work here, or culture, or whatever. And so it is really, really hard to have your message translated through 6 layers of leadership. So I can't say I was surprised. The spaces where I've been surprised are the ones who actively are subverting the philosophical shift. It was very intentional and very important to me to shift away from what had been a historically autocratic and authoritarian, sometimes even vindictive. I mean, this department experienced some trauma, and when I care for this organization, it's trauma-informed care. Like, I fully acknowledge that they've been through some stuff and have had some real management challenges here, but rooting out some of that cancer, I guess I was shocked by how big the tumor was,
mm,
but there was active saboteurs in a lot of ways that were trying to return the organization, keep the existing management style in place. It was, I don't know, probably day 2 when I had that big, thick IA file placed on my desk, that somebody heard about my open door policy and the fact that I would make myself accessible to any person in the organization. I don't give a crap if you're a probationary firefighter or a deputy chief, right? That everybody would have access to me, and they placed the chain of command policy on my desk just to remind me of, what the organizational
Mm.
policies were. And to which I respond, I'm really glad you put that here because now I can change it, right? But people who were trying to keep it the same. And we've had some non-regrettable attrition within the leadership team that I think has been beneficial for the organization, where people were disinterested in aligning with the human-centered leadership philosophy that we're trying to get to, and that weren't interested necessarily in collaborating amongst the sections or collaborating with the workforce that is so important to fulfilling our mission, right? And they didn't want to spend the time, or their ego wouldn't allow them to operate like that. And so in turn, they either, at best didn't support or didn't appropriately translate the message or transfer the message. And at worst, were actively trying to sabotage the movement of that to a more people-centered approach. So that was probably what surprised me the most. And I hope I answered your question,
Yeah,
Eric. And
no,
if I
it's good.
didn't, please feel free to ask a follow-up.
Yeah, no, I like it. Let's shift, if we could, to the some of the complexities maybe that Aurora Fire has in its size and scope. In my experience with the military, in military organizations, and you can attest to this, unity of command was paramount. And people leaders, whether they're commanders or platoon leaders or platoon sergeants or whatever, they were in the chain of command. And staff was always kind of separate. They supported the command. They supported what the commander was trying to do. What I found in especially bigger fire departments, once you start adding deputies and you start adding functions, whether it's fire prevention or community outreach or something else, the departments tend to start to evolve into almost like a corporate matrix organization where those things become mini organizations of themselves within the larger organization doing their own thing, and sometimes everything gets synchronized, but a lot of times it's not synchronized. And who really starts to feel that is the company officer when they pick up the phone or answer the radio and they're getting direction from the training chief, from logistics, from prevention needing a pre-plan done, whatever it is, right? And so if you go down to the company officer and say, why you so strung out? Why, everything's good. It's all good. And they're like, no, I'm answering to 6 different bosses down here. Where do you see Aurora Fire in that kind of on the spectrum between a full corporate matrix organization with lots of people doing lots of different things and the unified kind of unity of command that I experienced in the military?
But we've got it all figured out. So it's completely perfect. And no, I think where our pain point is for that. So we're deep in that. I mean, when you have organizations that are the size and scope of here, and there's a lot of larger fire departments, so I don't want to overstate the size and scope of the department or the complexity, but there is a requirement that you have people that are laser focused on specific aspects of the organization. So like you mentioned, fleet and facilities and training and community risk reduction, all really critical components of our operations here. And so what we've tried to do is really define, there's a structural leadership and then there's programmatic leadership. And so we use our division chiefs as an example. So we have 3 division chiefs that report to the operations deputy, and they're 3 shift commanders. So they each are responsible structurally for a shift. So you have an A shift division chief, B shift, and C shift. But they also each have a program that they're responsible to run. And so one is special operations, one is EMS, and the other is our fire suppression program. So think the CPSE model and sort of your programs that you do annual program appraisals on. And so there's crossover, right? And that can be challenging if you don't have a collaborative organization. And we experienced that early on where everything was siloed. CRR wouldn't talk to operations wouldn't talk to training, and so everybody was kind of doing their own thing. And so we've shifted that focus. I mean, we're all here to support operations. That pyramid is upside down, right? The fire chief's down here balancing everything we need to give the line staff the things that they need to take care of the community. So there's a little bit of a perspective shift. It's leadership, not kingship. And And so we've really encouraged cross-sectional collaboration. The group has taken that and run with it. They have what do they call them? Scrums, where they gather together if they have an issue that crosses sections or branches, and they'll figure it out so they can come up with a unified message. Now, even with all of that, the arbiter of this schedule isn't necessarily the company officer, but that gets pushed to the battalion chief. So in our system, the battalion chiefs are really the ones who feel the lack of unity of command. You'll have programmatic initiative from fleet, you'll have a programmatic initiative from training, you'll have a programmatic initiative from, CRR, you've got smoke alarm installations or whatever. And so we do our best to coordinate that, but we do our best to coordinate that through that next level up. So Eric, we don't have it perfected. I'm not sure if there's a way to create this beautiful architecture, right? Where all these things fall in this perfect sequence that's spaced out between the 16 or 20 calls that some of these folks are running in a 24-hour shift. We don't have it nailed, but we try and keep that pressure off of the busiest component, right, of our organization, which is the company officer, and share that management responsibility and that coordination piece, that gatekeeper piece through the battalion chiefs. So
Right. And it sounds like your chief of ops is probably the closest to what I would consider like a chief of staff that is synchronizing the organization. So when fleet maintenance says, "Hey, we need this engine to come offline because we got to do services on it," but training says that engine's committed to a live burn that we're doing for training, somebody is synchronizing that and making sure like, okay, we need to wait a little bit for maintenance and then we do the live burn or vice versa, and somebody's the person.
typically filtered through the division chief. So the shift commander would help deconflict that. And then if there was competing priorities, would prioritize it, hopefully before it made its way to the company officer. They don't want them to have that burden of logistical. I mean, the company officer, in my opinion, is the most important officer position in the organization. I don't want them distracted by that stuff. I want them to have the ability to train on task and tactical level operations with their crews and not have to worry about a lot of that stuff. Are we perfect? I poll them. They're going to say no. I know we're not. It's not for lack of trying. We've got now we have training and operations meeting to say what gaps are you recognizing in your quality assurance or your after action reporting that we can then create the training plan to fill those gaps. It wasn't happening 2 years ago.
Mm.
This incremental progress that we intend to make. It's an evolution, not a revolution, right? And so we are inching the ball down the field. We're trying to get the first down every 4 downs and keep getting towards the end zone on a lot of these culture shifts, right? But it ain't perfect, I promise you.
Do you think that your company officers and maybe even your battalion chiefs, as we work higher up the chain, understand the complexities of the larger organization and all the gears that are having to move and mesh together and everything to make the department work like it does? Or do sometimes the folks down there, they get that us versus them mentality, unfortunately, sometimes, and they're like, "What's going on up there? Why is the chief doing X and the deputy chief doing this, and why can't they get their act together?" Do you find that they largely get it because of the hard work that you're putting in to help them understand it, or is there still, some learning that needs to happen?
Yes and yes. I think we have a group of brilliant BCs, and we've wrapped them into a lot of these conversations through our command staff meetings. And so command staff meetings are battalion chiefs and up, and there's a cadence to those that's monthly, every other month. Some of those are kind of some training scattered in between there, but they have a lot of access. They also have a morning phone call where all the BCs get on with the shift commanders and the ops deputy, where there's a lot of information sharing and opportunity for them to ask questions about why we make such terrible decisions in the executive leadership. But I think sometimes there's still gaps, right? Because until you sit in a leadership position, until you sit in the chief's office, it's really hard to see all of the inputs to their decisions. Deputy chief, same way. Right? Ops deputy is probably the worst meat grinder in the fire service because that's to your point, where all of these demands kind of come together and you have to start working through your triage process. So I think we have brilliant battalion chiefs, incredible tacticians, good administrators, but I still think there's some gaps sometimes where they're going, man, I don't understand this, right? That's where I think the collateral circulation, the open door opportunities for them to come in and go, "Hey, I'm not picking on you, but I don't get this, man. I gotta sell this to the line. I gotta help them understand it and believe I don't understand it myself." That's where they have to have access to the decision makers to come up and share those concerns and totally transparent with you. There are times that I'm like, what? I don't know why we're doing that. That's a great question. And I think so it's valuable in both ways, right? They get to understand if there is a really logical size up behind our tactical decisions, or for us to check our ego and go, man, we made that decision recklessly or without complete information or whatever. And so that open door policy, that access and creating the level of psychological safety that I believe is necessary for people 2 or 3 or 4 layers down from you to come and share concerns is super important to a high functioning organization.
Was smiling because when I do some of my coaching with whether it be company officers or chiefs, one of the frequent lines that I use, like if I'm talking to a company officer, I'll say something like, "Do you think that the chief woke up this morning saying, 'Today's the day I'm going to screw the department over?'" Or conversely, if I'm talking to a chief, "Do you think that company officer decided today I'm waking up and doing bad work, right? Like that I'm going to just screw things up?" And the answer is obviously no, but it's so funny how the default in our minds tends to be like, what is going on? Why is the chief doing Is the chief out of his mind?
I mean, I think that's normal. We say that. I mean, like, heck, we look at whatever elected officials or whatever,
Mhm.
and we scratch our heads and we ask those questions. A lot of times we didn't see their size up. We haven't evaluated all the information that's coming in that's influencing their decision. And that's why I mean I love what you said there because it's a two-way street. I worked for a guy one time, he would come out after a fire and he would just blast the company officers. He's like, what were you thinking? This happened and this is the arrival order and this is the apartment the fire was in and all that stuff. And I remember I was a lieutenant at the time and calling the battalion chief out and I was like, hey man, like, you're coming to the table looking through the lens of your retrospectoscope, right? The powerful lens of the retrospectoscope. You have 125% of the information. You even know how the fire started. You know how many people were in the building. You know exactly what the arrival order was for all the rigs that showed up on the scene. The guys and girls that are riding the front seat of these engines, they have maybe 10% of the information, and that's questionable. And then they get there and they're evaluating very quickly a dynamic, lethal, stressful environment, right? They're trying to make the best decisions that they can make with all of those external pressures coming at them and really limited information. And so what you'll never see me do is go into the fire station, beat my fist on the, table and well, one, because I'm more of a politician than I am a tactician now, but and go, what were you thinking? Because I didn't see their size up. I didn't see what they saw when they got there. I didn't feel the pressures that they felt when they got there. I might ask questions like, hey, why this instead of that, right? Just so I can learn from the incident, but it's just not part of my DNA because I rode in those seats and I recognize the pressures that come with that and the incomplete information and all of the other dynamic stuff. But sometimes that needs to be reciprocated,
Sure,
right?
sure.
And so when you hear yourself going, what are these stupid, whatever, insert word here. I don't want you to have to beep anything out, but doing up there and making these dumb decisions, or this is the easiest decision in the history of decisions, unless it's buying tiller trucks, because there's no bad reason to do that. I'm just going to throw that out there. But all I think we ask for in that process is like, hey, give me an opportunity to explain my size up, right? Don't rush to judgment. You didn't see all the inputs to the decisions that we were making. You didn't consider you're only considering operational. You didn't think about the political, legal,
Mhm.
fiscal, organizational capacity for change. Like we evaluated these 6 pitfalls of making this decision and the risk didn't outweigh the benefit, right? So we're doing our own size up here. And a lot of times I think folks may not appreciate what that is. And So sometimes if there's a rush to judgment, that's unfortunate on their part, but it's also the responsibility of us to be available to kind of go out and answer those questions because I'm not going to be the fire chief here forever. One of these men or women in this organization who's asking these questions and sharing these concerns is going to step into this position and lead this department 5 or 10 years or whenever from now. And they need to understand what the lay of the land looks like. And so we need to be open to receive those questions and share what led us to that decision. And hopefully folks are willing to hear that.
So, Chief, and you may have just answered it here, but I was going to wind down with two final questions. And what you were just saying about reciprocation and having that trust sounds like it could be your answer to this question. But if you were going to give our listeners here just one thought about whatever role they are currently serving in their department, whether it is the fire chief or it is a company officer or it is somebody just on the crew or somewhere in between in their world and their scope, what advice would you give them about doing their part to maintain trust and alignment and clarity for
I
their
think it
leadership role?
Yeah, no, thanks for that question. There's a couple words that come to mind. Grace is one of the words that comes to mind. Humility is another word that comes to mind, and a commitment to excellence, right? I think, well, and gratitude. I think all of these things are really the antidote to entitlement. And I think when, like, th- doing this job is not an entitlement. It is 100% a privilege, and that includes the job that I get to do, right? And I think there's a lot of times that folks lose sight of that, right? They fail to have gratitude for the opportunity to care for a community in the worst times. They fail to demonstrate some humility when it comes to the decisions that are being made in the organization or that followership responsibility that we all have, right? To flip that coin between being a leader and being a follower. And so the gratitude and humility, and then, I think just the gift of grace. The people around you, the people to your point, like nobody comes in here and like wants to have just a decision become a complete disaster, right? No, nobody wants that, but it happens to every single one of us. And if you say it didn't happen to you or doesn't happen to you, you're lying to yourself and everybody around you. And so I think being able to just demonstrate or give the gift of grace and go, hey, yeah, this probably didn't land the way you wanted it to, right? But get it, thanks for making a decision. And thanks for admitting that it didn't go well and being committed to excellence, right? And being committed to not failing in that same way again, right? Fail forward, fail fast, fail forward, that I just think that comes with grace is the word that comes to mind. So we we want people to make mistakes. We want them to stay small and we want you to learn from every single one of them. But I don't want to end people's career because they made a decision and made a mistake. You show me somebody that's never made a mistake, that never made a decision. And so we just have to be willing to extend grace, and that goes in both directions when things don't go exactly right.
And I think that's such a good reminder, especially in the fire service and for military folks like me, we convince ourselves that because there are some things that are zero defects and they need to be done well and right because lives are on the line, right? When you're on calls, it needs to be done well. But we forget and we convince ourselves that that's the norm throughout the organization, but it probably 99% of all the other times we can make those mistakes and we can learn from mistakes and it's not a zero defects mentality or environment and we just have to just keep that in the back of our minds and I think you articulated that well. Last question, Chief. I know you alluded to throughout this conversation that a lot of things are about perspective and you don't know someone's size up necessarily because you're not in that role, but you didn't know you didn't know what you didn't know when you got into your role here as the Aurora Fire Chief. So what's something that you only learned as the Fire Chief of Aurora Fire once you were sitting in the seat? What's a lesson or
Man,
something that
that's
you
a tough one.
realized?
Well, I tell you what, from the outside looking in, I could have never recognized the strength of the culture and competence of the organization until I sat here. But I think also until I sat in this seat, I had an understanding that this organization needed somebody to genuinely care about them. think I fully recognized how deep that was and how important that was to the members of this organization. And I told you about, in a lot of ways, I adopted an abused family, and the care and concern and love, I'll use the word love, that has to be part of this leadership philosophy is so important here. And it continues to really guide me in the decisions that I make and the way that I care for the people here. And I remember when I interviewed for the job here, it was in January of 23, and went through 3 days of these different interview panels, and it was super stressful. And my wife was at the hotel when I she said, "What do you think?" And I said, "I think this department needs somebody to love them." And she told me, she goes, "There's nobody better for that." And it's been reality here. The folks, amazing humans, and they just want to be cared for by their leadership. And I don't think I understood the depth of that and the importance of that until I got here and sat in this seat. And I'm incredibly grateful for that opportunity. And again, I'm grateful for their trust and their fellowship and their authenticity and their badassery. I mean, these folks kick ass, man. I'm telling you, anybody, challenge accepted, but but
Throwing down the gauntlet.
they're just great humans. And I think that was the most compelling thing for me, is just how important that was. And I'll take that with me forever.
That is a great message and a great thought to great thoughts to leave us with today. And Chief, I certainly appreciate you taking the time out to join me and have this conversation, be a little bit vulnerable, talking about some of the experiences that you've had, some of the lessons that you learned. I certainly appreciate hearing about the systems in the large department like you have, things that work, things that you're still tweaking and working on. And then I especially appreciate your final message of people-centered leadership, and love and grace and that kind of thing. All of that I think will resonate well with the audience, and I certainly appreciate you sharing that with us. For those that are listening, thank you for being part of today's conversation. If something here resonated, pass it on to somebody that could use it. And if you haven't already subscribed to the podcast, please do so. Leave a quick review and check out other resources on convergentimpact.com. Until next time, continue to lead well, take care of your people, and keep setting the example. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.